Hello, my name is Scott Solberg, Associate Director of Research at the Center on Education and Work, and on behalf of the Center, it is my pleasure to welcome you to an afternoon tea, a conversation series on career and workforce development policies and practice held here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. An afternoon tea is also being sponsored by the Department of Counseling Psychology and the Wisconsin Career Development Association. Our guest today is Dr. Mark Savickas, professor at the Northeastern Ohio University College of Medicine, or NEO-UCOM. And our title for today's conversation is Mark Savickas Unplugged. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
To an afternoon tea.
Yes.
Now, it's something I've basically talked with you just a little bit about, but I wanted to make clear that the idea for this whole afternoon tea actually came out of the conversations that you and I have had over the years, the informal conversations when we've had a chance to just talk about the profession and the history and the legacies, and also you're in such an important position internationally and nationally as journal editor and all the travels to see where are we going as a profession. And I wanted to create some kind of a venue where we could just have it as a conversation rather than the traditional kind of a presentation. So thank you and welcome. Thank you for coming.
Well, thanks for letting me join you today.
First question out is really how you became interested in the field of career.
I was training in school psychology and waiting to do my internship in school psychology. And a person who was working in the counseling center, his father died, and his father ran a junkyard in West Virginia. And it was the son's obligation to give up the profession of counseling and come home and run the junkyard for the family.
Wow.
Thereby creating a position, a temporary position for me, but it goes to the heart of family and career that we talk about in making choices. And so I walked in the first day, and right behind me a student walked in, and the director said, "Here's your first client."
Oh my.
And the student had career concerns for which I was totally unprepared, having been trained to work with children and give whisks. Mm-hmm. And so that summer I took a career counseling course, and a new book had just been published by John Kreitz called Vocational Psychology. And I read that book, and the book just changed my career course. I just fell in love with the ideas in the book. And Dr. Lichtenberg, by the way, is doing a study asking different people in the field what are the 5 most influential books in their career. So the answer to me is Kreitz Vocational Psychology. And
wow.
From then on, from reading that book, I've devoted myself to this field.
Wow. Wow.
You look surprised by that story.
It's a great story. I didn't realize that the whole history behind it. I've heard parts of it, but not all of it together. And I also know that John Kreitz has been a big influence on you, and hope we can talk more on that too. But also 2 other people that have been a huge influence has been John Holland and Don Super. And I know we've had a chance to talk about the stories, and I'm thinking actually wanting to start back with your dissertation too, if you could talk about it, to just tell us about their impact and just your relationship with them.
Yeah. So switching my interests to the career field, I looked for a doctoral program where I could learn about career, and it wasn't easy for me to find. And eventually I found a wonderful mentor, Glenn Saltzman at Kent State, who said he'd take me as a doctoral student if I didn't take any courses there. And the idea was he knew I wanted to learn about career, and they didn't have much to offer. So each semester I'd sign up for 15 hours of independent study, and I'd go off and study somewhere. And he asked me who would I most love to study with, and I said Super, Holland, Kreitz, and he encouraged me to contact him, and so I had the best doctoral program you could have. I got to go study with the authors of the theories and just come back at the end of the semester to get my credits.
That's amazing. And
that was before all the licensing laws.
You spent like a whole semester
Yes.
working with John Holland and a whole semester
Yes.
working with Don Super.
And with
what
Kreitz.
was that like?
Well, it was the best education you could have. had access to their libraries and I could read everything. And if they went off and gave a talk somewhere, they'd bring me with them if they were doing a consulting project. And it became a foundation for lifelong relationships. You know, Saltzman had encouraged me to contact these people. I was shy and hesitant, and years later I found out, for example, from Dr. Kreitz, that he had spent 10 years writing that book that I talked about, and it had been out for a year, and nobody really seemed to care. It didn't seem to make an impact. And he was very sad about that. And out of the blue, he gets this letter from a graduate student saying the book has changed my career. And so he actually had me live at his house with him.
Wow.
And
then you get to see, and his writing style, you've told me about. I mean,
yes, he's when he went to Princeton the first semester, he got a D in English composition, and the professor volunteered to tutor him in writing, and the professor turned out to be Carlos Baker, who was the #1 authority on Hemingway.
Okay.
So he taught Kreitz to write in Hemingway's style, and Hemingway became an interest of Kreitz, and he has a very distinct way of writing, without adjectives, without adverbs, makes good scientific writing. And so as I was trying to learn how to write, you know, I would give Kreitz a manuscript, and after we did that a couple of times, he said, just give me a page. So we work one page at a time.
And that's how he crafted his work.
He crafted his work. I've read the same, tried to adopt Hemingway's style, and now I've in many different countries I give workshops for assistant professors on writing for professional publication. My idea is, you read about the baseball players who don't make good, the star athletes, like Mickey Mantle doesn't make a good coach, but Billy Martin does. So I think I make a good coach of writing because I was so awful.
You were studying hard at it. Well, I think there's a lot of people who would say your writing's not awful, but...
Well, I work on it very hard.
And then you've often said that John Kreitz was an absolute genius.
Yes, both he and Don Super had measured IQs over 200.
And they're taking the field, and their ideas on it were just remarkable from that.
Yes, to me there was two real giants of vocational psychology in the 20th century. The first half was Harry Dexter Kitson, who was Super's mentor. And many people are very familiar with Super and how influential he was in the second half of the 20th century, not realizing that his mentor was predominant in the first half. So there's a real line. A man named Angel at the University of Chicago later became president of Yale, never finished his PhD, Mr. Angel. He had a master's degree from Dewey and from James. He had two master's degrees. And he trained Kitson, and Kitson trained Super, and then Super trained Kreitz. So you have, a lot of people don't realize, this century-long interest in the self and the experience and exploration. And so to me, there's two huge traditions in vocational psychology. That East Coast tradition of Kitson, Super, Brewer, Harvard, Columbia, and then there's the Midwest tradition, which roots go to back to Leipzig with experimental psychology with Wundt. For example, Rudolf Pintner got his PhD with Wundt, and then trained Patterson, who worked then at Minnesota. So,
and then you get Spence and Hall and things in the Iowa and other traditions.
Yes, in Ohio State you have ARPS and others, and so there's always been the Ford and the Chevy in vocational psychology. There's always been the East Coast perspective, focus on self-concept, exploratory behavior, and not that interested in testing. And then the Midwest group that's very, very interested in testing and science. And it's always been interesting to me that there's been the parallel. When there was Kitson, there was Patterson. When there was Darley, there was Super. When there was Holland, there was Kreitz. You keep the two legacies alive.
And in that, you worked with Holland as well.
Yes, my dissertation was jointly directed by Don Super and John Holland, and I compared, at that time, Holland was defining consistency, his secondary construct of consistency, as equivalent to Super's construct of vocational maturity. So they jointly designed my dissertation to test that.
Okay.
Which was fun.
When you say fun.
Well, they didn't always agree on things.
That's kind of legendary. Yeah.
Yes, in some ways, Holland viewed all of career maturity as social class indicators, and that having middle and upper social class was synonymous with vocational maturity. But the roots go back to Kitson, who was Super's mentor, and Darley, who were Holland's mentor, were antagonistic towards each other.
Okay.
And then it goes back one.
Just continues to the next generation.
It's just so we have Professor Holland talking about the vocational development group as the VD gang, and that's when the field changed from vocational development to career development.
Okay.
And right after that accusation, it became not the vocational development inventory, the career development inventory. I mean, there's a backstory to these things.
That's right.
And then we have Professor Kreitz writing in the Burroughs a review of the self-directed search, calling it the misdirected search. So there's some there's a little difference in epistemology.
And you were kind of in the middle of it.
Joyfully so, learning from both, absorbing both, and, but realizing, looking back, that each community of scholarship tries to recruit the next generation to their community. So there's a little tug of war on graduate students as to, whose side they're going to be on, and it's unfortunate. One of the things that I've tried to do in my career is not to have sides. That we need to be a more cumulative science. We need to work together. Working in a medical school, I've learned very quickly, you don't make your reputation by developing a new theory or by, you make your reputation by solving the problem first. So the more we have our field focus on problems to be solved, the better off we are. One of the sad things about psychology is it's all about each person wanting their own theory, their own name, and
ownership.
We even talk, we don't talk in constructs, we talk in names. We don't say self-actualization, we say Maslow. We don't say Klein-Steiner, we say Rogers. If you listen to people talk, there's name, and rather than focusing on the problem, there's sometimes too much focusing on the name.
And it seems like that's exactly right, that there's so much of the personality that's implied in that. And certainly Holland and Super would be two of those in terms of their models. Just staying on this topic then, what did you take out of Holland that you thought was the most important, significant parts? And what about Super? Because I know you've blended towards the two, but you really focus on Super. But what is it out of the Holland's piece that for you is most?
No, see, like Super, I wouldn't say I really focus on Super. I know I've done a lot of work with Holland, and actually Holland was my first theory that I liked. Remember, I was working in this counseling center and without any career training, and the instruments, one of the instruments that we used was the Allport, Vernon, and Lindsay study of values, which had the 6 scales. And I was working on this little theory of 6 types, and if you match like the religious and the social, you got this, and if you mix the theoretical and artistic, aesthetic, you got this. And so when I read Kreitz's book, I realized, wow, this is all here, all fully developed. I like this, I can do this. So I have great respect, as did Super, for person, environment, fit. Today, what I value most about Holland's work is tremendous vocabulary of distinctions he gave us. It's a way of talking about environments, labeling environments, making sense of the world, that it's organized and there is
taxonomy
coherence
involved in the whole thing.
That's a tremendous, and the types, resemblance to types is very important. The congruence, which it gets support, is not as central to me though as, the primary propositions of his theory are the 6 types. So the types, the personality, I value
Well, the RESEC
greatly.
model gives everyone something to talk from.
Yes,
Starting point.
it gives the field of vocational psychology a shared language. We all speak RESEC.
And it's measurable, and it's something that we can then apply and across groups. And as you indicated, and
sometimes, I've heard Dr. Holland sometimes say that he thought one of the most important outcomes of the self-directed search is not knowing your own scores, but realizing that the world is organized and coherent and being able to think about it.
the process of understanding how careers and the world of work and self can be organized, as a skill set. You started to talk about super as someone who actually did value the person-environment fit, which gets forgotten, I think, a lot. And I know it's a topic that you brought up a number of times.
Yes, 1949, he published a 700-page book called Appraising Vocational Fitness. And it was at that time, and for 2 decades after that, the definitive textbook on person-environment fit, on differential psychology. So he summarized that literature, and that textbook, by the way, is still worth reading. There are chapters in there on the difference between inventory tested, expressed, and manifest interest. There's a section on how to do person appraisal versus problem appraisal. There's still a lot of wisdom in there. And after summarizing that literature, it's now 1949, 1950, and he turns his attention to something new, which is the idea of careers. And as America moved to the suburbs, as America expanded the middle class, we moved from vocation to career. And as we did that, the leader in occupational and vocational guidance still was the person-environment fit. But then we added the layer of the psychosocial. The super, if you do PE fit, there's always the dash, P-E. Super focused on the dash, the psychosocial integration. I noticed in your office this afternoon you had a book on the desk, and on the cover it said, work is where the person meets the world. Well, what super focused on was the developmental tasks of finding your niche, getting stabilized in it, and the processes. So the two go together in parallel, and one is about content and one is about process.
Oh, great. That's awesome. Thank you. Let me ask, we've got some questions. Now, we sent out a list, and we actually have a number of people from all over the world that have asked to see if you might be able to answer some of their...
I don't know if I'll be able to answer. We'll give a response.
Well, let's see what we can do. So Jennifer Phillips is a career specialist from Duke University, and Nikki Barnett is from Stony Brook University, another career professional, and both are interested in assessment and career development strategies, especially for individuals that haven't done a lot of career development. So we're talking, in one case, it's they just have had limited experiences. There's not a lot to draw on. And another case where they're getting students that are getting ready to graduate from college that haven't even started thinking about where they're going. And just interested from your perspective, where do we start with something like that?
Can we break that into two?
Sure.
The first one is that part about something about they really haven't...
Limited experiences.
I don't buy that.
Okay.
Each of us has a long history. I mean, if the person's 20, 25, they've had 25 years of experience. What they don't have maybe is reflection on that experience and turning that experience into constructs and self-knowledge and a self-image. But each person we work with has rehearsed for a long time what they're going to do next. And our job is to help them tell the story of that rehearsal and link it to the challenge that's facing them. So I don't buy the limited.
So when someone comes out with if they want to use assessment right away, that may not be the strategy to help really connect them to the story in some cases.
I'm very picky, as you know, very precise. There's a difference between assessment and measurement.
Okay.
Measurement is using a test or an inventory and getting scores. Assessment is much broader. So I would say we would assess the story. We would hear what is their preoccupation in life that certainly must be turned into an occupation. So to link to the second part of assessment and the difference between measurement and assessment, practically, I believe one of the most effective instruments is Holland's vocational identity scale. It's 18 items, and it does a superb job of indicating readiness for career services. And there are many career services. There's vocational guidance, career counseling, placement, mentoring, advising. And I want to know if we're dealing with 100 people, and we can't ask one at a time, the scores below 10, below 9 on that inventory indicate that the person is not yet ready to deal with interests and choices, and the intervention should be career counseling whose goal is development, to develop their identity, develop and articulate the story, clarify the values. If the scores are higher, if there's a crystallized sense of identity, that's ready for translation. Holland called interest inventories translation devices, translating from psych talk to OC talk. So I use the vocational identity scale as ready or not. And if they score 15, 16, 17, they're ready for placement.
Okay.
If they score 4, 3, 2, they're ready for, it's a cry for help, and you find them quickly. So I'm hoping to answer that question by saying the vocational identity scale, which is very inexpensive, 18 questions, really gives a good screen as to which career service might be relevant.
And what do we do with a college senior who's ready to graduate but doesn't have a crystallized sense of what they want to do?
One-on-one, or we get their story. We interview them, and
we assess them and connect to the larger story.
What I do is I have a set of questions that I ask, and I start off by asking how I can be useful. And if you listen very carefully to their response, what they want, what they need, what is ready to emerge, they will announce. And then you spend the rest of the time asking them a few more questions so they can narrate, they can articulate. The answer is inside. They know. When a person says to you, I don't know, they're saying, I don't trust you yet enough to tell you my dream.
Okay.
Or it could, but I always view it as I'm not ready to share, because they have dreams, they have ambitions, they have stories. And so if you listen very carefully, they will tell you what they need and how they need it. For example, I was just talking to a young man the other night, and I said, how can I be useful? And he says, well, I'm uncertain, I don't know what I want. He's graduating in May. I'm uncertain, I don't know what I want. And I said, you have any secret ambitions or dreams? And he said, oh, I've always dreamed to be a video game developer. I think about it all the time. It's a very difficult field to get in. That's my dream. But the follow through is a different story. Now, if you listen carefully, he's saying the follow through is a different story. The purpose of us talking together is to narrate and articulate the different story that moved from being dominated by authority figures to a story of I'm responsible to take some action. But he announces real clearly, I need a different story, and it's going to be about follow through. And just about everybody tells you what they need. So with a college person graduate, sorry.
No, this is exactly, and what you're describing is this whole notion of being a very good counselor.
A listener.
Yeah. and being a good listener. And we talked about, you mentioned earlier today about career therapy and the concept of connecting the fact that there is, in many cases, a therapeutic component to this, that you're really needing to listen at another level, which comes along with good counseling skills. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have another question. Now, this kind of changes the direction a little bit. It's we have 4 different people that have written about this topic, and some of them coming from far away. We have Kay Avery from New Zealand, Robert Pryor from Australia, John Nelson from UW, graduate student, and Rosie Berry, who's an assistant director in organization effectiveness at University of Minnesota. And it really has to do with Galat's work of talking about the whole ambiguity and uncertainty that appears to be essential in today's world of work. In some ways, we've got baby boomers that are needing to make effective transitions, which is part of this age of uncertainty. How are we helping older adults align with different workforce development strategies to continue working as they're moving through the system? How do we, in some cases, how are we helping employees learn the kinds of strategies and skills that they need to be effective just to keep the business sustained? Because that we're seeing a linkage there. But it comes back to issues of the managing uncertainty, dealing with the ambiguity, work stress, health, efficiency, creativity. We've talked about proactivity, adaptability, resiliency in other conversations. All this seems to be something going on, and I think people are trying to unpack it. What do we do? And of course, the emerging economic crisis only makes it a bigger deal. So I've thrown a bunch at you, but I'm just curious as to how you might respond to some of that.
It's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. The world is again reorganizing how it works, and when we move from the agricultural to the industrial era. To help people solve the problems presented by the new organization of work, the field of vocational guidance was organized and came as a response. After World War II, people were disheartened, disappointed with the industrial society, the machine era, and look what it had led to. And in psychotherapy, there became the interest in existentialism and self-actualization. But there also became the interest in career, which is more focused on you and how do you develop a lifetime of work in a stable organization. Now at the dawn of the 21st century, we are in a new era. There's a new social organization of work, and the world is populated by insecure workers, because before you could link your life to a life narrative and an institution. You could work at IBM and General Motors and Ford and University of Wisconsin for your whole tenure. Today, vocational psychology is poised for a revitalization to help solve the new questions asked. We can no longer be held. You have a little baby that you hold, the old holding environment of Bowlby to make you feel secure. What used to hold us as adults was the organization. They don't hold us anymore. We now talk about work being contingent, part-time, external, temporary. The typical position in the United States now lasts 18 to 24 months. 70% of all jobs end before 5 years. Mm-hmm. And so now we have projects and assignments. Mm-hmm. And so responding to those 4 individuals, what it shares in common is how does one deal with the anxiety of no longer being held safe by the environment, no longer having a retirement, no longer having health care. I think 46% of American faculty at colleges and universities are adjunct. Only 30% of current professors have tenure track positions. Right. So the world has changed, and I think what vocational psychology is doing to respond, at least what I hope we're doing, is helping people realize that they must hold themselves, and that career in Latin, its second meaning was path. It's the meaning that was adopted by Super. But the first meaning of career is cart, car, or chariot. So today, since the paths are ambiguous, disappearing, hard to find, we need to create our own cart, our own chariot. And we need to create a story for our life, a script that we can live, that we find viable. So when we face the anxieties of job transitions and retirement and job loss and being outsourced and right-sized, that we have the comfort of the story. And so what we need to work with each person is have them be able to say their story, what is meaningful to them, how are they wanting to design their life. As we move from vocational guidance to career counseling, we're now moving to life design. I'll pause to see if you want to say anything. I can keep going.
No, please, keep going. Oh, that's
So
amazing.
we've moved our constructs from maturity to adaptability. Maturity and development assume a stable environment.
Right.
We're in an unstable, Dr. Pryor would say, chaotic environment. So we now have career management and adaptability. You can't make plans because the institutionalized life course is gone. So the best you can do now is have guidelines, to have a mission statement to inform possibilities. When I say the institutionalized life story is gone, it used to be straightforward. You leave your family, get established in a job, get married, and have children in that order, and in roughly a 3 or 4 year period. Now, with the new organization of work and how it's reverberating through social life, those things are disconnected from each other. We have frequent dislocations. You may get married before you leave home, or you may leave home and get married and not have a job. And so instead of predictable stages like Super talked about in making a life plan, we have a series of episodes that can be fragmented. And the glue that holds them together is the story. It's having some unity, coherence, some continuity to the life. And as you're well aware, in 1904, 1906, Stanley Hall published the first book called Adolescence, and there became a new life period. You used to go from childhood to adulthood. You had puberty, and a year later you were married. So then they developed, as a society, adolescence. And now, as you're aware, we have a new life stage called emerging adulthood. And the 20s are not the years of settling down and having a career and a family. It's still of self-examination. And also, in the 20th century, at least for males, work was assumed to be the core salient role. In the 21st century, it looks like we're returning to family and community being the salient places, and work being something we do for income. So there is a revolution in the structure of work, and it's causing all of these issues.
And then a revolution then in the structure of identity.
In the agricultural economy, the concept of self was called character. We were all to be the same. We were to be honest, hardworking, spiritual. When we moved to the city and became an industrial economy, it became individualistic, and you were to develop not character, but personality, the facade with which you could express yourself and do your own thing, and then have that uniqueness matched to a position through vocational guidance. In the 21st century, the concept of self has moved to identity. So it's not today character, it's not today personality, it's identity. It is, what is your story? Can you articulate it? Can you say it out loud? We have new words like biographicity, meaning as you face career decisions, whether you're in high school or retirement, do you have the sense of your own autobiography to draw on to make the choices that are required? It's the agency given through knowing your story, biographicity.
That's
We're
interesting.
talking about individualization of your life course. So our words are changing. We're into identity. Instead of personality and jobs, we're into identity and assignments, identity and projects. We're into not test scores, but stories. We're into not being, when I graduated from high school, my parents expected me to get a job and be stable and mature. And if parents still expect that today, they're going to be disappointed because the work world is saying to be healthy, be flexible and adaptive. The rules are changing.
And the self then as this story in the making. And
It's always in the making, yes.
always in the making. And that's probably where the whole, I mean, so you have a student who isn't sure where they're going and what they're going to do. That's not necessarily a bad place.
They may not know the occupational title, but they know where they're going. They have a dream. Every life has a consistency, has a theme. There are central issues that are very easy for you to see when you're older, when you look back. What career counseling tries to do is help you see them when you're in the middle. Goethe said, the owl sees clearest at midnight. Our job is to look at your story as a novel being written. And you come to us at the end of a chapter, at the end of an episode. And you are now in transition, everything's transition, and you're facing a blank page. And you have writer's block. And our job is to help you reread what's in those earlier chapters and break through the writer's block, to use what you rehearse, to have you say out loud what you dream of, to have it become more real as it emerges as an understanding between us. So I'm deeply convinced that there aren't people who don't know what they want. Now the issue then becomes, instead of decidedness, of making the choice, the issue is of intention. What intentions am I going to try and impose? And we're shifting from the model of how work can use you, what machine do you tend, to how you can use work to become more whole. So having you articulate your story, having you announce who you are, having you reveal the secret that makes you whole, we can then talk about how to intentionally use that story to engage with the opportunities the social structure provides you. And if there is nothing open that's meaningful, there's still leisure time and family and community.
Right.
There's still a place for you to be you.
And be connected, right?
And be connected.
Yeah. Let me, another question. This one now is coming
Am
from...
I talking too
No,
long
this
or
is
two
great.
answers
No,
too
this
long?
is,
No,
this
it's
is,
okay.
I'm enjoying it.
Okay.
All right. You're currently the editor of the Journal of Vocational Behavior. You've been the editor of Career Development Quarterly. Beth Medley from the University of Missouri, Kansas City is very interested in terms of the emerging trends in career and vocational psychology. I know we're mentioning some of the changes, but you're also looking at research that's going on and and you've also been to a number of countries, and so you're seeing some different innovations as countries are at different phases around the concept of career development and what it means. You mentioned in Australia with Dr. Pryor and the whole idea of looking at management and things like that. So I'm curious if you could just give us a sense of what do you see as up and coming? What's the new things, and what should we be looking forward to?
One of the things I see makes me a little sad. One of the things I see is that our colleagues in human resources and industrial organizational psychology seem to be doing the better cutting edge work. In vocational psychology, we're still a little too linked to yesterday and what worked well yesterday. I believe that practice leads theory, that my model of career construction is an explanation or an articulation of the practices I used at work. And so the people who are working in industry with workers are developing, to me, the exciting new constructs. So we have Michael Arthur with Boundaryless Career, and Doug Hall with Protean Career. We have the idea of employability, replacing employment. We have the idea of lifelong learning. We have the issue of organizational commitment. How do you commit to somebody who's not going to commit to you? We have Denise Rousseau talking about the new psychological contract between worker and organization. So I think that it would be very important that in the beginning of our field, there was not a separation between career counselors, vocational psychologists, and personnel and industrial psychologists. They all applied the person, environment, fit model. Some called it guidance, some called it selection. Some, like Morris Vitalis, taught career counseling at University of Pennsylvania in the morning and was director of personnel at Philadelphia Electric in the afternoon. So there was this synergy. Over time, we have split, and I think it's critical that we reunite. And there's some people like Audrey Collin in England, and Polly Parker in Australia, who are trying to establish a field of career sciences, of career studies, where vocational psychologists and industrial and people interested in social construction can come together to help contribute to solution of today's problems that the four people mentioned. So, but I personally think they'll have to get rid of the word career and be about life, or some other word has to come
Instead of career.
in. But the exciting stuff to me is coming from the people who are leading practice. And if you look for innovations in career counseling procedures and methods and materials, it's coming from practice. Jenny Brimrose in England has a practice research network where she works with over 50 counselors who are doing similar things and trying things together and trying then to build the theory out of practice. So I would look to practice, not to theory.
Right. Interesting. But at some point, though, there has to be some theoretical grounding to some of it. But the innovations coming out
There
of
has to
practice,
be, huh?
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
But going from scientist practitioner
What is a theory? I heard
framework.
it's a hunch that went to college.
It's certainly, and there's some marketing in that too. You had to sell it, right? So it had to be a sellable point. So interesting. Tell me about, let's talk some about the work you've been doing. You've been doing a lot around the convergence around some of the major career theories. You've been doing a lot around career narrative, and you've mentioned a lot about that in the stories. You've also had a lot of work in terms of time perspective, which I don't think many people are as aware of in terms of things. So I was hoping you might talk about this. I know Sheila Jensen, a career counselor from Wisconsin, is very interested, if you can get a chance to say, how do you help the client get the story going? What are the strategies to evoke some of those stories? So as we talk about career narrative and all of that. So what I'm wondering is maybe first you could talk a little bit about your ideas around the convergence. And briefly, and then...
And briefly.
Well, only because I know...
Briefly.
Well,
Be brief.
I think you really want to talk about the career narrative, or the narrative process, so I want to make sure there's time for that. And then we also have some questions that other people that are here are going to want to ask as well.
Looking back at over what I've done, Don Super always called his work segments of theory. He had the PE fit segment and the self-concept segment and the life cycle, lifespan segment. And he always told me that his ambition was someday to put together those into one comprehensive theory. And I never had that ambition, but looking back, what I've done within career construction, to me, is career construction focuses at 3 levels: the types of Holland, the tasks of Super's vocational developmental tasks, and then the themes of the life. And so at the first level, we talk about a personality. At the second level, how that personality engages with the world, where the person meets the world. And as that process occurs, the person builds a life story. looking back, I now realize that that level of story is the glue that integrates the personality and adaptability. So now as I get the story, I listen for 4 kinds of adaptability: concern, control, curiosity, and confidence. I do listen for the Holland types and environments. And then I listen to how it's put together in uniquely you. So when we first did the, with Bob Lent, the Career Convergence conference, there was concern that I was trying to just converge and impose what would be my theory on everybody else. I wasn't. But looking back over time, I think I've, using social constructionism as an epistemology, been able to glue things together. So, so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and in gluing things together too, the story of identity comes up as you come into the career narrative, and it
Yes.
really ties it together. Maybe you could
yes,
tell us.
yes.
something.
Again, practice into theory. For 35 years, I've been using questions, and in the beginning, I wasn't able to articulate. At some intuitive level, I knew it was working. Now, for the last 5-10 years, I've been working on doing public demonstrations and teaching it in a systematic way. So now I have a set of questions. To make it simple, I ask who are your role models, because I'm looking for the solutions to problems in growing up. I'm looking for the self that is you. Then I ask about your favorite magazines or television shows, and in that I'm looking for which environment you want to place that self, what stage you want to place it on. And there I use the Holland environments to make sense of it. And then third, I ask your all-time favorite story, whether it's a movie or in a book, and that's the script you're living. And so now we have self, stage, script. My fourth question is, what's your favorite saying? Could I ask you that, or would that be too?
I would have to have a second to think, because I'm
You
in
have to have a
difficult right
second
now,
to-
but
okay.
I might come up with one.
I won't put you on the spot, because you won't let me. But the favorite saying, in the beginning I was just typing it by Holland type, but over the years I realized it's the person's best advice to themselves right now. And so it's the direction they're giving their character to enact a script. And it's very profound when you read these answers back to the person, saying, this is who you are, this is the environment you prefer, this is the script you want to live. And the problem you brought to me, remember when I asked how I could be useful? Listen to this advice that you give. So the answer's within you. And from those 4 questions, you can do profound, sacred work. If you want to go deeper, I ask the earliest recollection. What is that preoccupation? What is the primordial story that is important to you? And I ask that last because we've built some safety, some trust. And when I read it back to you, I start with that. I start with, here is the issue at hand. Here's the most important thing going on in your life right now. Look at this self that you've just created. See how that self solves that problem. See how you've constructed you to deal with it, and look at the environment where you can use that. And look at this story. Doesn't this story actively master the pain of that preoccupation? And so it becomes deep and therapeutic, quickly, powerfully, and beautifully, and it always works. Always works.
I'm
when
in
I,
disagreement.
when I, years ago, I used to be concerned that it always worked. I couldn't understand, how could this always work? And eventually somebody explained to me that it's from the deep wisdom of the client. They are telling me at that moment the story they most need to hear. My job is to be a good audience, to validate, authenticate the story, say it back, make sure they can narrate it better. So it always works because it's you.
Right.
You're solving you.
Right.
And it's a beautiful, joyous experience.
And releasing in terms of the next steps. What's from your you've been doing this for a long time. What's been give an example of something that just the magic that happened from it, and how the person was, what they did with the experience, and
happens all the time. Rather than talking about it, as you know, I like to do public demonstrations, and there's always magic happens when you talk about you and you focus on you. And I have some DVDs sold by American Psychological Association. I would commend you to watch. I think it happens all the time. There's nothing that's. I can't really answer.
No, that's fine.
I can't really respond.
No, that's fine.
I'd rather demonstrate with you.
Well, in the time we have,
Okay.
yeah. But you do have demonstrations.
Yeah.
So did you want to demonstrate with me? We can do a few minutes.
Well, what's our all-time favorite story?
Let's see. All-time favorite
from
story.
a book or a movie.
A book and the movie, probably The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, what's that about?
It's about, let's see, lots of levels. Person on a voyage that they aren't sure of why they're there and what they're doing on it, and
All right,
they're
stop.
battling.
Because we don't want to get too personal.
That's okay. Well, we can get as personal as you want.
But you already heard Scott say many levels. I'm complex. I'm deep. I'm superficial. I'm deep. Take whatever level you want. And this person is on a voyage. Now, what's the favorite metaphor you use in all your career work here in Wisconsin? Your favorite poet, David White. Career is like a what?
Yeah, it's like it's being out on the career is like the ocean being out on the
voyage.
ship and the voyage. Yeah.
And then what else did you say? I usually write this down.
Yeah.
What did you say after a voyage? I forgot.
In the unknown sea.
An unknown sea.
Unknown sea.
Yes, making decisions in times of.
That's right.
All I'm trying to show, without invading the privacy that is Scott's, that we do respect deeply, is you can imagine now we've got 2 sentences out of him, and we've already got the script of his life. If we knew about his heroes and we knew a favorite environment and his advice to himself and his preoccupation, he's not going to leave uncertain or confused. He's going to leave more whole, more complete, more confident about his calling, his vision. Mm-hmm. And when he has to make a choice, he has this to choose. He has this to guide him. Mm-hmm. Life is a voyage. There are many different levels. I choose uncertainty. Mm-hmm. I choose risk. I choose trying. Mm-hmm. My favorite color is plaid.
Plaid?
That was a joke.
I guess so.
Yeah. But I mean, not to be so. What's your favorite saying? Those who are listening, would you rather have a test score? Would you rather have a strong profile, or would you rather have those 3 sentences? See, this is what I'm saying. There's no indecision. There's no uncertainty. There is a script. There is a transition in chapters. We're going to rely on what's been rehearsed to go forward.
Yeah.
And the role models, I usually ask about 3, and the way I like to explain it is when the 2 high school students in Cleveland, Ohio, created Superman. Mm-hmm. They took Tarzan's hair. Mm-hmm. They took Flash Gordon's outfit, mm-hmm. and they took a weightlifter's high boots, put the 3 together, and constructed Superman. And that's what we all do. We pick heroes and heroines, we take bits and pieces, mm-hmm. and we construct Scott. Mm-hmm. And Scott had to be constructed in a way that he could go on a voyage of uncertainty. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
So who's your role model?
My
when you were young,
models.
when you were making your mind up about life.
Well, of course, we had soccer players, so that
like
was
who?
always Beckenbauer from
Yes,
Germany,
I don't know him
center
at all.
halfback.
What was he like?
He was the captain on the team, and he was the star from Germany. Played on the.
Yeah, what kind of personality did he have?
Oh, I have no clue. We just watched him play.
All right,
soccer.
well, we know you're captain of the team and you direct the center and you're star of the show, but let's go a little deeper than that. We got Superman's hair. Now let's go to the outfit.
Gosh.
Give me another one.
Another, like a role model hero.
When you were a kid, I liked
So,
Zorro
I love
and
the King Arthur tales. I love Merlin was my favorite.
Merlin was your favorite.
Yeah.
And you asked me, when does magic happen?
I did ask
Yes,
you
you
about
did
magic,
ask me.
yes.
What do you know about Merlin?
That he made things happen.
What kind of things?
I guess impossible things
Yes.
that weren't expected.
Yes. What else?
And he was working for the better of whatever community he was working in.
Are you smiling?
I'm smiling.
Yes. It's powerful, wonderful. That's why I say I'm not sure I've ever met anybody who's really uncertain.
That they have things inside, and you just give an opportunity for it to come out.
And all my job is to sit here and applaud. Beautiful, wonderful, smile. Listening to your stories, like going to an art museum, looking at beautiful paintings. That's why it's joyous work, and I don't feel like I'm working. I'm just sitting here admiring.
How do you create the safe place to evoke that then? How do you do that? And I know you've got things to demonstrate and show, but just in a nutshell, what do you?
I don't know. People trust me. Somehow, I've never worked on creating a safe space, but people know I'd cut my hand off before I'd embarrass them. I don't know the answer to.
Okay.
How do you think I create it?
I think those things. I think there is an art to it. I think you do have a presence about you that's very assuring and supportive. I think you're also you have a confidence in it that we're about to go into something that's unknown, and I'm confident.
Unknown to me, not
exactly.
unknown to you.
But unknown for both of us, and well, I understand, but I mean in the sense that you're gonna help us work through this and talk about it. And bring it out.
So I don't want people to think though you have to have some special skills to do biographical work. The person will protect themselves and screen the stories they tell you.
Yes.
And they will. So don't be afraid to try this. And also, a way people will protect themselves is they'll tell you stories that have implied things, and if you're not connected enough to hear it, you're not going to hear it. So, for example, one person was telling me her role model was Aunt Betty, and I said, "Well, what's Aunt Betty like?" And she said, "Well, Aunt Betty was, hardworking, a good teacher, and the things she did well." Well, does that phrase strike you? The things she did well. So I asked, what did she not do well? And she said, well, her husband raped me every day for 2 years when I was in high school, and she knew it, and she didn't stop, and she didn't do anything about it. If I didn't ask, what does Aunt Betty not do well, I'm not going to deserve to hear the story, and I don't deserve to hear it. And if I can't be trusted to hold the pain. Remember we talked about the story holding you. As you're telling your stories, the painful stories, I have to be able to hold that tension between us until we can look at the solution, to look at the mastery of it. So people will protect themselves, and especially in their early recollections, there are things implied that if you can't hear it, you can't hear it, you can't. Does that make any sense to you?
It does. I would say my reaction first is that I agree with you that people will protect themselves, and so it's not like you're going to be pushing on them in a way that they're not going to step back from. But I do disagree with you about that anyone can just do this, in the sense that I think that you do have skills, you do have special ways of listening and hearing what's going on. I think there is a certain artistry to the process over time, but also I think there's an art beyond just the technique. I think there's
the technique will get you started. Just if you only ask one question, just ask the role model question, and
allow that to unpack and just.
And after you do that 100 times, you'll get better and better and better.
Sure.
One of the most disheartening things to me is you're broaching on something that's very disheartening to me, is sometimes people leave a demonstration and say, "Isn't Mark great?" And that's not the goal. That makes me very sad. The goal is, I want to try this tomorrow.
Right.
And that's why for 10 years I've been working on how do you teach this, how do you bring it out of everybody.
Right.
So don't say, Mark, there's an art to it that only certain people can do, or you didn't say that, but I'm saying everybody can hear a story. If you're a counselor, if you're an advisor, if you're a coach, you spent your whole life rehearsing hearing stories, and you can do this. and you can do it better than me after a while.
And it becomes then seeing other people be able to demonstrate, seeing other people be able to enact
Yes, and
as
so,
the role models
yes.
of how to take the technique into a larger
So
scale.
when we go to NCDA, we have a half a dozen people
Trying it out. And working
trying
on
it out, demonstrating
Yeah.
it, and also the demonstrations show it is not that hard to do. You ask the questions and then rely upon your basic humanness and your empathy, and you don't have to have any solution.
Right.
The person brings it. Your
Right.
job is to make them hear themselves. And everybody can do that, Scott, in their
I agree
own
with you.
style.
I
Thank you
agree
very
with
much.
you.
Appreciate that. I'm glad we don't disagree.
We have time for some questions. I want to get started on some of those. So
Or comments.
or comments. So people want to come up to, we have a microphone here that you need to come up to, and we'll start asking questions. I certainly have more, but I wanted to make sure we had time for you all as well. So I'm going to continue conversing, but someone come up to the mic and then we'll shift over. So,
Or not.
well, we do have a question from Sue Whiston, who you know from Indiana University, who's very interested in what your secrets are in being so prolific. And I wanted to expand that a little bit to your advice to graduate students or assistant professors as they're coming out. How do they build a career, a professional career in the say the academic realm of things in terms of giving into research and all of that?
First, create a good family for yourself. I have a wonderful wife and daughter, which keep me balanced, healthy, focused. So career is one role, and make sure it's balanced well with family and community. And I believe that only the strong can be generous. So take real good care of yourself, and then you can be generous to help other people. Number two, what you were really asking is more trite advice, but for example, well, compared to,
Well, I don't know about trite, but
well,
meaningful.
compared to family,
Okay,
and
yes.
compared to the rock that we stand on. All right, not trite. But my pat advice is never do anything for one reason. Everything should have at least 3 reasons. If you're doing a term paper, it should be on the topic that your dissertation is going to be on, and it should also lead to a convention presentation immediately and be part of your literature review. And anything you do, life's too short to do it for one reason. So there has to be, I'm working with, I won't say his name, I've been working with the past couple months with another fellow who I think is incredibly efficient he's doing like 5 things, one thing for like 5 reasons. So articulate your story, know what's important to you, and do things that work on it at 2 or 3 angles for everything you do. So as a doctoral student, for example, your dissertation topic needs to be about you. It needs to be biographicity. It needs to be about your story. If you get hoodwinked into doing a dissertation on your advisor's biography, you may end up ABD, or you might be in a lot of arguments about how the story's coming out. But if you select a topic that has to do with you, again, there's synergy because you're developing you're studying yourself, you're studying your issues. And so I never do anything for just one reason. I won't tell you why I'm doing this, but I have 3 or 4 other reasons.
Interesting. Okay.
Efficiency's important, time utilization's important. There's all kinds of what I call trite tricks. Never touch a piece of paper twice. You get something on your desk, you look at it, and you act on it, and you throw it away.
Okay.
You could look at it 10 times before you act. I mean, there's all the times. Do the hardest thing you have to do today first.
Okay.
When I was young, I'd wait till 4:55 to do it because it scared me and it ruined the whole day. Now I do it
Right away.
So
start with that.
Get a coach, get a mentor. I've always been privileged to have Kreitz and Super and Saltzman. Get somebody who cares about you to watch what you're doing, to give you feedback. Seek feedback. Seek constructive criticism. Don't accept it's wonderful, it's fabulous. Don't accept a person saying this is great. Say, yes, it's great, but how could it be better? You know, what can I learn?
Yeah, that's awesome. And then how do you balance all of this to be continuing writing and getting things out? I know you said make sure each project has multiple things, but are there any other strategies you use to?
My basic strategy is I love to learn new things. And so I'm always excited when I'm working on something new and learning something new. And so it doesn't feel like work. It feels like play. I don't know if that addresses.
No, that's so enjoying what you're doing and continuing.
Personally, I like to learn.
Yeah.
I want to learn something.
Well, I've been to conferences with you, and you end up going to all kinds of different topics that I might not have otherwise thought of. That was how we got on the topic of McAdams and learning about his work. So in another area of psychology altogether, but it was something that had grabbed you, and it certainly shaped a lot of my thinking after that as well.
Yes, McAdams taught me that when I'm asking about role models and stories, I'm inquiring into cultural scripts, that the culture provides healing stories for individuals. It's a warehouse of solutions, and that they are sources of the self, and we build ourselves. And so now I'm working on going around the Holland Hexagon, cataloging the cultural resources offered that are taken. So, for example, realistic is maybe Paul Bunyan, and social might be Mother Jones.
Okay.
And it's fun. And Holland's, again, the synergy, you know, Holland's, you know, in literary criticism, they say there's only 7 stories. There's just a few basic stories. Holland's gives us a nice catalog of 6 fundamental stories. There's a story of being realistic, the story of being curious, the story of being sensitive,
Sure.
story of being, and so what we're actually doing in using Holland's methodology is seeing what story your life script matches best. That's an example of the synergy, you know, between the theories. Holland's theory is the social construction.
Right.
You know, he's picked the stories that are important.
Right. Right.
For example, David Campbell totally disagrees that 6. He says there's 7. That factor analysis that Guilford did in '54, that Holland used as one of the fundamental basis of his theory, had a 7th factor called adventure. And David loves adventure and risk-taking, and his Campbell skills inventory has
that.
7.
7.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and they just brought it into the R, and R's always been a little bit difficult for having both things in there. Working outdoors and adventure being in one category.
Yeah, but also look how, again, it's autobiographical.
Yes, how the person, what they get out of it, yeah. It'd be interesting to hear Holland's end as to why he chose 6 then.
He says in terms of human ability to remember, hold things in mind. You can hold 4 to 7 things in mind at the same time. So if you wanted 4 types, you could have 4. If you wanted 7, you just pick 6.
So
it wasn't
6.
about the hexagon, because originally there was no hexagon. Originally, he said he combined Guilford's factor analysis with Spranger's 6 types, which are in the Allport, Vernon, Lindsay study of values, those 6 types, with Adler's notion of lifestyle. So you put that together and you have the beautiful, elegant, simplifying taxonomy. It takes a very confusing, complicated world and makes it simple. And so he's, you know, stood on the shoulders. And if you read his mentor Darley's 55 book on interpreting the strong, you read that book and you can see that the next thing that's coming is going to be something like Holland's.
Wow.
I mean, you can just see the progression. So that's one of the advantages of knowing our history as a field. You can see also what's ready to emerge, what has to come next.
And you mentioned right now what it is we're changing the whole notion of what it means to be a worker and the relationship between work and self.
Yeah, you were asking before about cutting edge things. One of the ones that I forgot is, there's some people in IO writing about the change. First we had a job, first half of the 20th century, then a career, second half, and now a calling. And they're not doing it so much as what you are called to do by God, which is the vocational, and not so much what Super did, what you are called as an occupational title, but what you are calling for from the world. What does your story require to become more whole, more complete, more full? What are you calling for? What do you need?
Which needs much more self-examination.
Knowing your story.
And connecting yourself to the opportunities that are out there.
One of the things that is fundamental that we work on in all the career fields, career education, coaching, is enhancing narratability, the ability of the individual to say out loud their story. Because as they say it, it becomes more real, and they become more real.
Right, as a result. Which is taking us from the test and tell type of models. To getting
but
them to...
the test and tell is good when you're dealing with 100 people at a time. Group, there's nothing.
Right.
Vocational guidance, if you have to
groups,
deal...
You need to have some place to start.
Yes. And in fact, I know at University of Maryland for many years, they gave all entering freshmen a self-directed search. And those who had the highly inconsistent profiles, artistic, conventional, they tracked those down first to give the individual career counseling.
Okay.
So that it might not have to be either or. As a high school counselor, you can test the whole 10th grade, and looking at the scores, there are patterns there that should concern you.
Having multiple types of assessment involved in it, yeah. We need any questions that we have from the group?
Anybody want to tell their story?
Okay.
But not tell your story?
You don't have long enough. My story's too long. Mark, I was really, I'm Bruce Walpole for those who are kind of watching, but Mark and I have known each other for a long time. But I was really curious about your reflections on the field and how in a lot of areas people are doing work in vocations and careers in areas other than counseling psychology, and we've kind of become isolated in some ways. In the counseling and psychotherapy area, we've done similar things, and now that's not a very important part of counseling psychology any longer in a lot of ways. So I guess I'm asking you for the life story of our field and where you see us going and what we, and I'm going to put my own kind of opinion on this, what we need to do to kind of regain our vibrancy in some ways.
That's too hard for me. What are your thoughts? Bruce, my true answer is I don't really think much about counseling psychology. I identify with vocational psychology and focus on vocational psychology. And one of my concerns about counseling psychology is that its roots were in vocational guidance and career, and yet it likes to drift off into being clinical. And too many PhDs in counseling psych immediately have their business cards printed that says clinical psychologist. And the only time counseling psychology really cares about the career field is when APA is reviewing the specialties and what makes them unique. So the difference to me between counseling and clinical is that counseling has vocational, and we're letting that atrophy. What are your thoughts? I mean, you think about it more than I do.
Well, I probably don't think about it that much, but certainly your observation got me to kind of reflect on this. But in your presentation, as you talked about working with clients, you really talk like somebody who knows people and how they make their way through life, which is what we do in therapy if we're good, in my opinion. And so I listen to you, and I'm thinking that kind of separation between vocational and counseling and psychotherapy just disappears when you talk about it. It was beautiful that way. And I'm afraid in counseling psychology, we haven't just lost vocational, but we've also lost that real sense of we have what I always thought was a profound respect for the people we work with. And in some ways, we've become too clinical in my part of it, too, because we want to see that empirically supported treatments and all this kind of stuff is what the field is doing. We have to do it as well. But I guess we can talk as old-timers, but it was really satisfying to hear you talk about how you interact and listen to clients, and as much as vocational is the foundation of counseling psychology, so is that deep respect for the people we work with.
Yes. Our original roots were social work. It was the social workers in the big cities who were engaged in the practice of child saving. And one of the practices of child saving became vocational guidance and counseling, and it became the friendly visit, and it started with knowing the person, the settlement houses where you actually settled in and lived in the neighborhood. So yes, there is that deep respect. The other thing, Bruce, I wanted to talk with you about is that I'd like to see us work on a little more synergy between career counseling and psychotherapy, because to me, psychotherapy is meaning modification, and career is meaning management, using the meaning. And Freud wrote that good psychoanalysis ends with a few sessions of career and marriage counseling. Carl Rogers, on his 7 levels of functioning, says that about level 5.5 is where psychotherapy ends and career counseling begins. And he believed that good psychotherapy ended with career counseling. He actually wrote a book on career counseling that nobody knows about. So to me, it would be fun to have more interaction, that psychotherapists who come to know their clients so deeply and say goodbye have the closure with some little bit of career counseling. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I wouldn't put it at the end. I would put it throughout. In my work and supervising students, half of the clients come with conflicts with family, right? The other come with some kind of conflict or dissatisfaction with work. I mean, the person is the person interacting with family, community, work. And these things aren't really separable. And so when we think about, I guess I'm in agreement with you, but let's not just tack it on at the end. It's central. It's central to one's satisfaction with life entirely. And I'll give you a good story. I agree to present at the Wisconsin Psych Association often because I like to do my work locally as well. And we had this debate one year from this fellow at a hospital that has a big OCD clinic. Okay, and so I'm talking about common factors, and he's talking about they have this great program for reducing symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. Then he said, we started giving a quality of life measure, and we really understood that we've removed the symptoms, but their quality of life really hasn't changed. And so what they said was, well, we're going to give them some vocational counseling, so now that they don't have the symptoms, they can actually get a job. And it's that kind of compartmentalization of this notion of we've got mental health disorders, and if we remove the symptoms, people have a rich and interesting life. It doesn't happen
The
that
symptom
way.
is the best solution they have so far.
Yes.
And our job is to come with better. Of course, I agree totally with the interdigitation. And I remember, 20 years ago, there was a lot of debate about personal counseling versus career counseling. And Nancy Betts resolved it by saying, I don't know about you, but my career is pretty damn personal to me.
Yeah, that's great.
The other thing I want to say, Bruce, is that for the field of counseling psychology, I'm more interested in the internationalization and how counseling psychology is being formed and formulated in different countries. And as I go around the world, what I see is they all start like the United States starts. They start with vocational guidance. They start with career and work issues. So in other countries, when you say counseling psychology, it's career work, and it's interesting to me that all the issues in the United States about it being, is it a North American specialty, or can it be internationalized? And we want to know your childhood hero. When you were growing up, when you were 5, 6, 7.
My childhood hero was probably my dad. Was kind of a local
Dads don't
Democratic
count.
person, and
Dads don't count.
no,
You
no,
didn't choose
no, no.
them.
I'm just saying that
Oh.
was the context.
Oh.
So it was political figures. I admired Harry Truman. That's how old I am, by the way.
Well, tell Mindy and the others about Harry Truman. What did you admire about him?
Well, he really had a passion for common people and wanted to talk about it plainly. So he would sacrifice his political career to actually say, I want to help somebody.
Yeah.
And to see someone as a political figure do that.
Now tell us about Bruce as a psychotherapist and professor. How does he like to teach and talk to patients?
Well, I think I resonated with when you said, I like to ask them about themselves and observe it as a work of art.
Yeah, but it's also, you speak clearly, plainly, like Harry.
Yeah, let's not make it too complicated.
Yeah.
Let's be pragmatic and get the job
Yeah,
done.
I'm trying to link
No?
the practice today with that role model. Are you with me? Those are, and you also gave us a hint of your interest in politics when you said, I go to Wisconsin Psychological Association because I also like to work locally. Yeah, you're smiling. Yeah, you recognize yourself.
Well, there's also a personal part in it. I want to be respected by the people in my own community.
Yeah.
I want to contribute to them. That's how
Yeah, Harry never quite got there.
the local part. Well, he was a hero in Missouri.
Oh, he was, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably the only place he could go back.
So
After.
give us a second one, quickly, one other one.
One other
yeah.
hero? Good question. Put me on the spot here. I have to go back a lot of years, think about heroes as a kid.
Well, Well,
Well,
Bruce,
this one's going to, well, I don't know.
you don't want to say that one. See, he's protecting himself.
No,
Scott said,
no.
leave him alone. All right.
Okay,
Scott
well-
says, leave him alone.
No, I'm going to
Bruce, we've got Al's right here to help take you off if you're.
Well, no, Al said it. I have a hard time doing this. This is going to really seem strange because he was probably not a figure people would admire much, and probably most people don't even know him. But Dave Beck, okay?
No.
Dave Beck was a local, do you know Dave?
No,
Dave
no.
Beck? Dave Beck was head of the Teamsters Union before Jimmy Hoffa. So that's, and it's not exactly a very pretty world, but he was when the Teamsters were in Seattle. And here was a guy who, even though he probably was corrupt, really did a lot for working people. And so we'd have these debates in my family between my dad, who worked for the Teamsters, and my mother, who thought this was the worst environment in the world. My stepmother, actually.
I grew up in a Teamster family where
Did you?
Jimmy Hoffa was a hero.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
And so there was a great respect for using that power, even though it was somewhat corrupt, to something that was
Using the power to do what again? To help?
to help people who didn't have a lot of access to means.
Yeah.
And
So
and
listen
that
to
was-
this tape again someday, Bruce, and listen to the beauty of your life. A life devoted to helping people who don't have access, to people who don't have power, to people who are disenfranchised. And you've devoted you to them.
Well, I appreciate that, Mark, because I think that's why I am in the field.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your story, even though you didn't want to. But quickly, I want to.
We got time. We have plenty of time.
Quickly, I want to say as they're moving, the reason I ask about these old stories, first recollection, childhood heroes, is because everything is so clear and simple and straightforward. If I ask Bruce who he admires today, we get all confused and lost in the complexity. But do you see how beautiful, how elegant it's stated, how succinctly it's stated? You can't help but just repeat the beauty and the joy and the life in that, and the pain. Bruce will go to psychotherapy when he's blocked from doing that. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Mark, again, thanks for coming to Madison. And I wanted to pick up on a theme that you talked about earlier in terms of individual or organizational and industrial psychology, and that move away from the conversation a little bit from talking about individuals to talking about organizations. The group that we focus a lot on at the center is American high schools. There are 16, 17,000 American high schools in this country who are struggling right now, I think, with a lot of issues, trying to prepare the next generation of people to take on significant roles as career roles and civic roles, family roles, et cetera. But if you look at what happens, roughly 30% of the kids who show up at college, 3 months or 4 months or 6 months later, have to do remediation. In most of our American urban high schools, 50% of the kids who start the ninth grade graduate, perhaps, at 3 or 4 years later. So, I mean, if you were going to think about how to take some of your career construction theory and develop interventions and apply them to high schools and apply them to some of these problems that high schools as organizational elements within a community have to confront, I mean, how would you construct it? Where would you put the emphasis? Would you focus on professional development? Would you focus on building new cultures in that school? Would you focus on revamping the curriculum, giving all the teachers a role as a counselor, so to speak, in these schools? What would you do? And then in terms of designing an intervention, and I think the second part of the question for me is, how would you test it in terms of how well it works? As you know, the federal government now is really interested in random assignment experimentation. So could you design an intervention, given this theory, and apply it using some kind of random assignment model?
That question is so far beyond me about reformulating the high schools. The little part I can deal with is what kind of interventions. I mean, we have interventions that have always worked. What I would try and do is reinforce reinforce teachers what they're already doing well. You remember when you were in high school, our goal was to get the teacher off the topic. We did everything we could to get them to talk about something else. And when they were off the topic, they were talking about life, their issues, and we were riveted. And we wanted to learn from them, we wanted to hear from them. The high school English teachers had us write biographies, had us write stories about ourselves, had us learn to narrate our ability to see the pattern in our life. The high school librarian knew us well enough to recommend books, to provide us these cultural scripts that we needed to read. There used to be, with the Cooter interest inventory, there's the occupation finder, but there's also the book reading list based on your occupational code. And one of the founders of vocational guidance, Bloomfield, said when he was in the settlement house as an immigrant from Romania, there was a woman who had a little library, and she got to know the kids well and gave each kid a book that would change their life. So I don't know about the bigger question now, but in terms of career education, I would start to focus a little bit more on having people announce themselves, announce their own presence in the world, articulate who they are, tell their story, but that's much too simple. Your question is way too profound for me.
I don't think so.
All right.
Well, I mean,
Well, no, it was a dissertation question.
no, it's a hard,
But
the,
getting
the best teachers allow themselves to be models for their students.
and what you're talking about is getting story making going on in the classroom.
Story making, myth making, but
I don't know.
I don't feel competent to speak on that.
Can you, I know we're right at 4:30, but I wanted also to give you a chance, just briefly, you started to mention when you're responding to the question before about
See how smart I was to say I'd give responses, not answers?
Very good.
These questions are too hard.
Yeah. Well, you did, you started talking about where counseling started. And they started in Boston, where you were working with youth. And maybe for just, I know it's the centennial of Frank Parsons, maybe just a brief kind of story about where that happened. I know you've been to the place where Frank Parsons worked and
The story's been told so many times. Let me tell a prior story. It didn't start with Parsons. Parsons gets too much credit. After the Civil War, the YMCAs in Chicago, Boston, and across the country were doing career counseling, vocational counseling with veterans of the Civil War. The office in Chicago in its first year in operation had over 600 clients. But it was a specialty within social work called a friendly visit. And you had a friendly visit with an adult social worker or somebody who knew the world more than you. And if you were going to leave the farm and go off into the city, you would get some consultation from the friendly visit. And so there's a woman who's a hero of scientizing social work named Mary Richmond, who wasn't a big fan of the way Parsons did it because she had
her
other
own way.
ideas.
Yeah.
But what made Parsons so famous is he was the first one to say, let's apply science to solve this problem. That before that, it was friendly visits and using phrenology and palmistry. There was the work of Mary Blackwell, Lysander Richards. But when Parsons said, know yourself, get some occupational information, and use true reasoning to match the two, that phrase, true reasoning, gave us a scientific credential. And so Parsons became important then. But just this last week, the current issue of Career Development Quarterly, I have a long article about a person who I think is unknown but deserves much more credit than Parsons. His name's Meyer Bloomfield. And Bloomfield hired Parsons to operate the vocational clinic. When Parsons died, he took over and ran the clinic. Bloomfield wrote the first textbooks on career counseling, taught the first university courses on career counseling, was one of the founders of what's today the National Career Development Association, and believed that educators and industry must work together. So he is also the founder of what today is called the American Management Association. So there are some giants. There are three women that I describe in the article who were pioneers and progenitors. So there was a lot of other people who were working on this, and for some reasons it's all Parsons is the only one mentioned. So I know you wanted to hear a cute story.
No, I wanted to hear
but-
history, and that's thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
We are now history ourselves.
We are now. Are you saying you're done? So, thank you, Mark. This has been wonderful. This has been an afternoon tea with the Center on Education and Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please visit our website at cew.wisc.edu to find out about our annual careers conference and our WISC careers and career locker systems. Also, we have lots of professional development opportunities in relation to translating career and workforce policy and research into practice. Information on how to view our afternoon tea and readings for the session are also online. I want to thank Jennifer Lindwall for her invaluable help in coordinating the event, and Nancy Mitchell and Anthony Hernandez for the graphics. Also, our co-sponsors, Department of Counseling Psychology and the Wisconsin Career Development Association. And also the Pyle Center and the UW Extension for the facility and the technology support in making the afternoon tea available to an international audience. On behalf of the staff at the Center on Education and Work, I want to express also our thanks to Mark for all of his insights and for today's wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Okay.